When you've spent decades with someone, you learn the shape of their silences. You know when it's nerves, when it's anger, and when it's guilt. My wife's silence that evening wasn't the silence of a tired day. It was the silence of someone caught. Before I dive in, let me pause a moment. If you've ever given someone a second chance, only to realize later they didn't deserve the first, you'll understand why this story matters. If you're new here, welcome. I share real stories of betrayal, justice, and the kind of revenge life forces us to invent when those closest to us cross the line. And if you've been around for a while, thank you. Truly. You're the reason I keep telling these tales. Please subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment if you've ever been betrayed after forgiving someone. And if you know someone who's been through heartbreak, share this story with them, because sometimes they need to know they're not alone. Now, back to that night. It had started with whispers. A friend of mine, old fishing buddy, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but I saw her at the diner with someone who wasn't you." I laughed it off at first. My wife and I had been together 30 years. We had weathered lean times, raised kids, buried parents. Cheating? That was something other men dealt with. Not me. Not us. But then the signs started showing. Late nights explained with half-hearted excuses. Phone calls answered in the other room. That silence at the dinner table, heavier than usual. And when I finally asked her outright, she didn't deny it. She cried. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "It meant nothing. Please don't throw away 30 years over one mistake." The words cut deep. I wanted to shout, wanted to walk out. But in the end, I stayed. I told myself forgiveness was strength, that I wasn't a quitter, that families, real families, fight through storms. So I forgave her. We went to counseling. We held hands at sessions, nodded along as the therapist talked about trust, about rebuilding, about starting fresh. And for a while, I believe we had. Life went on. I kept working long hours at the plant, saving for retirement. She kept the house running. On weekends, we'd visit the kids, smile for pictures, laugh around the table. The wound was there, but I told myself it was scar tissue, not something that could bleed again. When the plant finally offered me early retirement, I took it. I pictured mornings with coffee, afternoons tinkering in the garage, evenings with her by my side. I thought, foolishly, that stepping away from work would give us more time together, that maybe, just maybe, the forgiveness had been worth it. But the truth about scars is this: some don't heal. Some just wait under the skin, ready to split open again the moment you press too hard. And when retirement brought me home more often, I pressed right into it. The first clue came on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd gone out for groceries, took longer than expected, and when I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. Her car wasn't alone. Parked 3 feet from the curb was a truck I didn't recognize. And when I stepped inside, I heard the laughter, hers soft and nervous, mixing with a man's voice I didn't know. I froze in the hallway. My heart pounded in my ears. 30 years together. Months of counseling. A second chance I had bled for. And there it was, proof that forgiveness had been wasted. That was the moment I realized she hadn't stopped. Not after the tears. Not after the promises. Not even after I gave her my trust back. She'd only gotten better at hiding it. I didn't step into the living room that day. I stood in the hallway, heart pounding, listening. Their voices carried, muffled by walls, but clear enough. The man's laugh was low, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't place it yet. Hers was softer, almost girlish, a tone I hadn't heard from her in years. I should have barged in, should have shouted, demanded answers. But I froze. My hands clenched, my throat locked. 30 years of marriage had taught me how to read every shift in her voice, every pause, every sigh. And in that moment, I knew without a doubt, I was listening to the same sin I had forgiven years ago. I stepped back quietly, left the groceries on the counter, and slipped out the front door before they knew I'd been there. I drove aimlessly for hours, the roads a blur. My stomach churned with anger, but beneath it was something worse, shame. Shame for believing her. Shame for staying. Shame for convincing myself that forgiveness had made me strong when all it had made me was blind. That night, she kissed me hello like nothing had happened, asked about my day, stirred a pot of soup on the stove. Her performance was flawless, her mask polished from years of practice. And I sat there at the table, watching her, realizing that everything I thought we'd rebuilt was nothing but painted over cracks. I didn't confront her that night, or the next, or the one after. Instead, I did something I hadn't done the first time. I watched. The truth has a way of revealing itself if you give it time. And now that I was retired, I had time. I noticed patterns. Calls she took in the laundry room. Quick glances at the clock before she ran to the store. The way her phone never left her side, even when she went to the bathroom. I started keeping notes, writing times, dates, excuses. It felt obsessive, maybe even paranoid, but deep down I already knew what I'd find. One Saturday, I pretended to head out fishing. Packed my gear, told her I'd be gone until evening. Instead, I parked a block away and walked back on foot, careful not to be seen. Sure enough, 30 minutes later, a familiar truck pulled into my driveway. The same one I'd seen that Wednesday. The man who stepped out was someone I knew. Not a stranger. Not some nameless fling. It was Mike, a neighbor 2 streets over. A man I'd had beers with at barbecues. A man who once borrowed my tools and never returned them. My chest tightened as I watched him walk casually to my door, knock once, then let himself in like he belonged there. My wife opened it, smiling, her hand brushing his arm as he stepped inside. It was one thing to forgive a mistake years ago. It was another to realize that mistake had never ended, that it had simply moved underground, grown roots, become routine. I stayed out there longer than I cared to admit, sitting in my car, staring at my own house like I was a stranger to it. The curtains shifted once. A shadow moved across the room. I didn't need to see more. My imagination filled in the blanks cruelly enough. By the time I drove away, my anger had hardened into something colder. I didn't want shouting matches. I didn't want excuses. I wanted the truth. And if she wouldn't give it, I would take it. The next day, while she was out shopping, I went through her phone. I shouldn't have, maybe. But after years of trust burned to ash, I didn't care about shoulds anymore. The messages were all there, hidden under a fake contact name, but sloppy enough to betray her. Can't wait for Wednesday. Last night was amazing. Wish he'd stay at work longer. Every word was a dagger. And yet, strangely, I didn't cry. Didn't rage. I just felt numb. Because none of it surprised me. Not anymore. That night, she sat across from me at dinner, chattering about groceries, about Linda from church, about the neighbor's dog. She smiled. She laughed. And I stared at her, realizing she had rehearsed this act for years. That the woman across from me wasn't my wife anymore. Not the one I'd married. Not the one I'd forgiven. She was someone else. Someone I didn't know and didn't care to know anymore. But I didn't let on. I chewed my food, nodded at her stories, even chuckled at the right places. Because this time, I wasn't going to confront her in anger. This time, I was going to be deliberate. I went to bed that night with a plan forming. A slow, careful plan. One that would take everything she thought she had, security, secrecy, comfort, and strip away piece by piece. And as I drifted into restless sleep, I realized something important. Forgiveness hadn't been strength. Patience was. And patience I still had plenty of. After that night, with her phone in my hands, everything looked different. The house didn't feel like home anymore. Her laugh didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like rehearsal. And every time I looked at her, I didn't see my wife. I saw a stranger wearing her face. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. The younger me would have stormed in, shouting, demanding explanations she'd twist into lies anyway. The older me, the retired man with time on his hands, understood the power of patience. If she had played this game for years, I could play it for a few weeks longer. So I smiled when she smiled. I asked about her day. I poured her coffee in the mornings like nothing had changed. And at night, while she slept, I planned. The first step was quiet. I met with Alan, my lawyer. He'd helped me with some pension paperwork after I retired, and he was the kind of man who didn't waste words. I slid the stack of copied text messages across his desk. He read them, lips pressed into a thin line. "She's still at it," he muttered. I nodded. "Never stopped. I forgave her years ago, and she never stopped." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You want a divorce?" The word sat heavy between us. Divorce. 30 years, split into paperwork and signatures. But I shook my head. Not yet. I want protection first. I don't want her walking away with half of everything I built while she was busy sneaking around. Alan's eyebrows lifted. "Smart. We'll move assets. Lock things down. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late." That night, when I came home, she was in the kitchen humming while she cooked. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, the same cheek she'd kissed before running to him. I smiled back, played my role, but inside I thought of the papers Alan was already drafting. Quiet shifts in bank accounts. Adjustments to my pension disbursements. Steps that would leave her with nothing but her guilt when the day came. The second step was evidence. Not just texts, not just my suspicions. I wanted proof no one could argue against. So I hired a private investigator, a wiry man named Curtis who'd been in the business for decades. He carried himself like someone who'd seen every kind of betrayal and didn't flinch at any of it. "You're not the first man in this chair," he told me. "Won't be the last. Give me a week." And he delivered. Photos, videos, dates, times, every detail of her rendezvous with Mike. Dinner at the diner. Afternoons at motels off the highway. Even a night when I was supposedly out fishing with friends, she'd spend it laughing at a bar with him. When Curtis handed me the folder, my hands shook. Not with shock, I was past that. With anger. With finality. Every image was a nail in the coffin of the marriage I had once believed unbreakable. But I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I slipped the folder into my briefcase and carried on like nothing had changed. The third step was the hardest, keeping up the act at home. She'd chat about neighbors, about sales at the store, about little aches and pains. I'd nod, ask questions, even laugh when she told a joke. We went to church together, sat side by side in the pew while she sang hymns with her guilty lips. To anyone watching, we were the same couple we'd always been. But inside, I was already gone. There were nights I'd lie awake beside her, listening to her steady breathing, and think about the years I had wasted. All the moments I'd worked overtime, so she could stay home with the kids. The vacations I'd postponed, so we could save for the future. The forgiveness I had given her when she begged for a second chance. All of it thrown away for cheap lies and borrowed afternoons. And yet, I didn't move. Not until the trap was ready. Alan called me one afternoon to say everything was in place. Accounts shifted, titles adjusted, pension payouts rerouted. The house, the savings, the future, all secured beyond her reach. "Whenever you're ready," he said, "we can file." And she won't know what hit her. That night, she curled up beside me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder. We watched some sitcom rerun, her laughing at the canned jokes. I didn't laugh. I just stared at the screen, thinking about how much of our life together had become a rerun of its own. The same lies, the same betrayals, looping over and over. And in that moment, I decided the curtain was about to fall. The next chapter of my life wouldn't be lived in shadows. It wouldn't be shared with a stranger who wore my wife's face. It would be mine, free, clean, and dignified. But before I walked away, I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the betrayal she had given me. The morning I chose to end it all started like any other. She made coffee. I read the paper. We spoke about little things, the weather, groceries, and neighbor's barking dog. From the outside, we were the picture of a steady marriage. From the inside, I was a volcano that had cooled into stone. I had spent weeks playing along, wearing the mask of a forgiving husband while quietly preparing my strike. The accounts were secured. The house was in my name alone. The will had been adjusted. And sitting in my briefcase was a folder thick with photos, texts, and documents that told the real story of my marriage. I waited until after dinner. The plates were cleared, the television hummed in the background, and she was flipping through a magazine at the table. I set the briefcase down beside her and opened it slowly. "What's this?" she asked, looking up with a faint smile. "Proof," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. She frowned as I slid the first photo across the table. Her and Mike at the diner, leaning too close over pie and coffee. Her face paled, but she forced a laugh. "That's just Mike. He was helping me with." I cut her off by sliding the next photo. The two of them at a motel entrance, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. Her lips parted. No words came. I slid more across the table. The bar, the truck in our driveway, the texts I had printed. "Can't wait for Wednesday. Last night was amazing. Wish he'd stay at work longer." The magazine slipped from her hands. She pressed her palms flat against the table, as if bracing against a storm. "Tom, please. I can explain." I shook my head. "No. You explained years ago when you cried and begged for forgiveness. You told me it was a mistake, a one-time thing. And like a fool, I believed you. I gave you 30 years. I gave you my trust back. And you never stopped." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached for my hand. "It's not what you think. I'll pull my hand back. Don't insult me with more lies. Not now." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match could have been. She sobbed quietly, muttering apologies, excuses, half-formed sentences that meant nothing. I sat there, steady, cold, letting her drown in the evidence spread across the table. "Finally," she whispered, "are you leaving me?" I leaned back, folding my arms. "I'm not leaving. You are." Her head jerked up, eyes wide. "I've already spoken to Alan. The accounts are locked. The house is secured. The divorce papers are ready. You'll get nothing beyond what the law forces me to give. No half of my pension. No claim on this home. Nothing." Her mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for water. You planned this?" I nodded. "The moment I realized forgiveness meant nothing to you. While you were sneaking off with him, I was making sure you'd never take another thing from me." She tried anger then, her tears drying into bitterness. "You can't do this. I've been your wife for 30 years. The court won't let you cut me out." I smiled cold and small. "The court will see the evidence. The years of betrayal. The messages. The photos. They'll see exactly who you are." Her face crumbled. She slumped back in the chair, staring at the pile of proof like it was a coffin. Maybe it was. The coffin of a life she thought she had secured. The safety net she believed forgiveness had restored. I stood, closed the briefcase, and left her there in the kitchen. I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I didn't need to. The quiet was louder than any rage could be. That night, I slept in the guest room. I heard her crying through the walls. Years ago, those cries might have broken me, but now they were nothing more than noise. The next morning, she tried again, pleaded over breakfast, promised she'd end it. That would be different this time. But I'd already heard every version of that promise, and I had already buried it under hard evidence. "I forgave you once," I said, standing with my coffee in hand, "and you showed me exactly what that forgiveness was worth. There's no second forgiveness. Not now. Not ever." Her tears returned, but I turned and walked out the door. I had an appointment with Alan to sign the final papers. The marriage had ended long ago, really. I was just the last one to admit it. But now, she would feel the weight of her choices. Not in shouting, not in broken dishes, but in the silence of an empty future, the house she'd lose, the pension she'd never touch, the legacy she'd forfeited with every stolen kiss. The divorce wasn't a storm. It was a slow, grinding process, paperwork, hearings, signatures. No shouting matches in court, no screaming across tables. Just the quiet dismantling of what had once been 30 years of a life together. She tried to fight it at first. Her lawyer argued for half the house, half the pension, half of everything I'd built. But Alan came prepared. The photos, the texts, the investigator's report. Every piece of evidence painted a clear picture. And when the judge looked over the file, his expression told me everything. She wasn't getting away with it this time. In the end, she walked away with little more than her clothes, her car, and whatever dignity she could still scrape together. The house remained mine. The account stayed untouched. My pension secured. All the protections Alan and I had put in place did their job. She had gambled my forgiveness and lost. The last time I saw her outside of court, she stood in the driveway with a single suitcase, staring at the house like it was a stranger. Her eyes were red, her face hollow. She whispered something I couldn't quite hear. Maybe an apology, maybe just regret. I didn't ask her to repeat it. I simply nodded once and turned back inside. It wasn't anger that filled me. It wasn't even relief. It was something quieter, something colder, peace. Because for the first time in years, I no longer had to wonder. No longer had to second-guess her silences, her excuses, her smiles. I was free from the burden of forgiveness that had been betrayed twice over. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once laid out her lies in black and white, and looked around the house. My house, still standing, still mine, a monument to hard work, to loyalty, to patience. Things she had thrown away, but I still carried. Neighbors asked questions, of course. "This bus traveled fast." Some looked at me with pity, others with quiet respect. But I didn't explain much. I didn't need to. Let her tell whatever story she wanted out there. I had the truth, and more importantly, I had my dignity intact. Their W. He turned into resolve. I had survived betrayal not once, but twice. And I hadn't let it destroy me. Now, my days are quieter. Coffee on the porch, long walks, fishing trips with old friends. Life is smaller, maybe, but it's honest. And I'd rather have honesty in solitude than betrayal in company. She, on the other hand, lives in a rented apartment across town. I hear bits and pieces. Mike didn't last. Money ran short. Promises dried up. That's the thing about people who build their lives on lies. Eventually, the foundation crumbles. And maybe that's the best revenge of all. Not screaming, not punishing, just watching as betrayal eats itself alive while you stand firm on truth. I used to believe forgiveness was the highest virtue. Now I believe wisdom is knowing when forgiveness is wasted. And when I think of her now, I don't feel hate. I don't feel longing. I feel nothing. That, I've learned, is the cleanest goodbye. And if you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. You're the reason I tell these tales, because betrayal isn't rare, and neither is justice if you're willing to stand firm. Please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that forgiveness doesn't mean blind trust. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you discovered your spouse never stopped cheating? For me, I already gave her the answer: silence, truth, and a cold goodbye.